Good evening. Welcome to this month's Town Administrator's Report. I'm David Watts Jr., and with me is our Town Administrator Steve Maio. Steve, welcome.
How are you, David?
Good. We're coming up on the end of winter, hopefully.
We are. The winter that wasn't. Let's hope it stays that way.
Yes, well, I'm sure the snow budget is happy.
Well, happy. I talked to someone today who was driving down here from Maine and said it was snowing in Maine and New Hampshire and ski country. Perfect. And we just got rain, so I'm thrilled.
Especially this week, because as we're taping, this is school vacation week.
Yeah, so this is nice.
So a lot of folks are off for vacation.
Right.
And this is also, being February, the first of our annual 3 shows leading up to an annual town meeting, which starts on Monday, May 4th.
Monday, May 4th, yeah.
And so this one, we're going to talk a little bit. We're about 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the budget process?
I would say we're about 2/3 of the way through. And, I kind of think about the budget process. I think there's 1 week in July where we don't really talk about the budgets. That's about it. After that, we're talking about it, we're balancing it. But, I would say on the, we really start thinking about the budgets really, I think, as early as August and September. So I'm really not lying. We had a wonderful tri-board meeting back in this fall. We kind of set the table for where we saw our next fiscal year, which is fiscal year 21, believe it or not, going.
For new residents, let's talk. What is the tri-board?
Well, a tri-board is actually kind of a new phenomenon. So it's for new and for old. Is that where the major boards in town, the town council, the school committee, and the finance committee, kind of got together and laid out a kind of state of the state and where we projected revenues going, where we projected our hope expenses, would go. There's a lot of things that are out of our control. We don't know what state aid is going to be. That act, frankly, did not come in quite as well as we would have liked.
But we frankly don't usually know even when we hit annual town meeting.
Yeah, we don't know for sure, but we have we get the first rendition of it anyway, the governor's rendition, also called the House 1 budget. We don't know, frankly, if we're going to hit with any extraordinary expenses, particularly in special education. So we don't know that, although at this point in time, we don't have any extraordinary that I know of. We don't know. We laughed about the snow when we started the show. We don't know what Mother Nature's going to bring, and hopefully doesn't bring anything more at all. That certainly helps out that. That's the only budget, we call it the snow and ice budget. It's the only budget that we as a municipality can put into a deficit in a current fiscal year and then just make up for it on the following year, on the following fiscal year. So, and I think the reason for that is that, the way that we govern ourselves, town of Wakefield, we couldn't hold a special town meeting, with all of the publication requirements and items like that to put money into the snow budget because we might be hit with the blizzard now. We couldn't even get to the town meeting because we couldn't plow it out. So it allows the community to overspend, frankly, or spend more than we budgeted for in that area. And in some years, it's been immense. Think about the blizzard of '78, which we just a few weeks ago was the anniversary of that. That came in.
42 years.
Yeah, we had to get rid of the snow and ice. So those things happen. So we don't know a lot about that, but we do know some. We look at trends. We know that we've seen some new construction in town, and how did that add to our bottom line? So we kind of set the table for where we think things are going to be. What we can afford, where we can be sustainable, wanting to certainly maintain our reserves, which took us a long time to get there, frankly. I think we've talked about that over the last 12 years, you and I.
We have.
Sitting in these 2 chairs. And that's very important for us to make sure we get a good bond rating so we can provide lower rates on our projects, particularly the Galvin. It helped with the Galvin. We have a high school project that may be coming up. So things like that. So we look at those trends, and then as we get forward, then we start going into the nitty-gritty, and we actually start looking at every department, line by line, meeting with our department heads. Kevin Gill, our town accountant, really takes a lot of that on here, and we make sure that we are being fair to our employees
Sure.
and being fair to the public, and also making sure we provide the services that people want. And that is the real balancing all of those together. Now, we all would say, I'd love to put, $10 million next year into roads. All right, that's a big issue, right? We can't do that and survive. But we can do some things, and you're going to see some exciting things coming up in that area, in the roads in particular, in the next few months. But that's what we do. So right now, we're about 2/3 through the departments in the town.
Right.
So, and that's kind of where we are today.
And of course, the two things we won't know about until virtually the last minute are the school department.
Correct.
They usually don't come in with their budget until toward the end of the process.
We should we should have some sort of a initial number on that March 10th, I believe.
And then the other one is the Voc School.
Vocational school, the same thing. They'll be coming out in the latter part of March.
Right.
Vocational school being a lot less than the Wakefield Public Schools, at least as a percentage of what we're spending.
Yeah.
So,
well, we have quite a few fewer, but in looking at the 2/3 that's already been discussed, except for 4 items that caught my eye, all of the numbers seem to be at or below the inflation over the last year.
Yeah, well, that's we try.
Yeah.
I mean, we do try.
Yeah.
There are outliers, and we do try to be as frugal as we can. I'm not sure all the taxpayers would agree, but they don't all agree on everything anyway. But no, we do really look very carefully at each budget in a line-by-line manner as part of that overall framework. So we try to start at zero and build from there.
Right, right. And one that caught my eye that was particularly interesting, and part of that may be that we will be in a presidential election in the fall, is election expense, 45.28%.
Right, in that budget, but an increase. But then again, the entire budget is a mere $37,000. So I think what's important to look at with the election budgets is that we budget for known elections.
Mm-hmm.
So this fiscal year, we had 2 known elections, the year we're in now. We had a special election that kind of threw us, a special primary that kind of threw us in the world.
We didn't see Paul Broder
We didn't see
mayor.
that happening when we made the budget. And for the coming year, being fiscal 2021, we're going to have a November election. We're going to have a primary in September, or an election in September for the state
Rep, state Senate candidates, right?
Candidates. We will have a November election, which will be the presidential election,
Right.
and any statewide offices.
Right.
For the Senator Markey's seat, there's actually a battle going on there, a race there.
Yeah.
And
although that doesn't, Senator Markey, yes, it does affect us. I was going to say Seth Moulton, our congressman, right now,
I don't think
looks pretty safe.
he looks pretty safe, but who knows?
Yeah.
But who knows? He's at least safe on the primary. And then we have the regular town election next April. So having 3 elections for next year increases that by about $11,000 or $12,000 an election, which we used to say it was around $15,000 for an election. By moving to the central location, we're saving on a number of items, including police details and what have you, so that kind of tamps down the cost. And I think, frankly, has provided a much better venue for the public. So that one, it does kind of jump out when you look at that. You say, oh, 45% increase, but it's a small budget.
The other one that had a seemingly high increase was an item called building.
Yes, building department.
16.51%.
Right. And that is something that will be discussed with the town council formally on our meeting Monday the 24th. Monday the 24th. And what is going to be happening there, frankly, is that for the last few years, or as long as I can remember, actually, we have been sharing some resources with Linfield. Okay, for a lot of reasons, which we'll go into, that kind of shared regionalization is going to be tampered down, mainly because we have a lot of stuff going on here in Wakefield, a lot of building going on in the next few years, including vocational school, a high school, a lot of Tarrant Lane, which is 184 units going on the Reading border.
There's the proposal for the head of the lake.
Proposal for the head of the lake that we haven't even seen yet, but
Right.
that's something that'll be coming up. And other varied proposals in town. Foundry Street, a lot of work on Foundry Street and Albion Street. So that's our end. On the other end, they're not seeing that so much in Linfield. So they don't need, in their minds, this kind of, larger department to handle everything. So that means that, regionalization, I've always said, and I'm a great believer in it, and we've talked a lot about that on the show. I think it's great for a number of reasons. It works well. There does come a time when maybe it is not effective for both parties.
Right.
So that is going to be, we're taking ours back. They're going to go on their own, probably in a more limited basis than we would be going, and we could go. So either way, they were either going to contribute less to Wakefield, which frankly wasn't going to work for us anyway. So it's
Right.
kind of a amicable divorce. Let's put it that way. Where we'll still be friends.
which we've already seen with the health department in Reading.
Right. A few years ago, our health division was Reading, Wakefield, and Melrose.
Right.
And for whatever reasons, Reading decided that wasn't working for them. So Reading, we went from a 1/3 participant, with 3 communities, to a 50% participant. So actually on the health department, you see a little bit of an increase on that one too, more than the others, because again, and that was only a 5% increase in that budget, but more than overall.
Right.
That was because some of that was still weaving it through. So that's what happens with these things. It doesn't always, it's not always foreseeable, and it's not always a huge overall number, but when we look at department by department,
Right.
maybe that department increased a little bit, but the overall number is still around 3% for everything we
2 of them actually are slated to go down markedly. One that was particularly surprising because so much more emphasis has been put on this in the last, in this fiscal year especially. Parking clerk is slated to go down 24.24%.
Yes. Again, a smaller budget. Okay, our parking clerk budget, it's about $12,000 a year. It's going from $12,000 to $9,000 a year, so it's a $3,000 decrease. But really what happened here is that some of the expenses that were attributable to the parking clerk really should be in the police budget because they're doing the enforcement piece. So the police budget actually absorbed some of those costs. So that was kind of a zero-sum game
Right.
on those two.
So let me understand this clearer. We have one currently, 2 with an opening for a second parking clerk
And that may have been
downtown.
filled by now. Yes, those are parking enforcement officers.
Okay,
Okay,
but so are they assigned to the police or are they?
they're assigned to the police.
Okay,
Right.
so that's where that
The
cost
parking
is.
clerk is where you would go to appeal your
At town,
ticket.
yeah, at town hall.
At town hall. So some of the actual materials and supplies
Yeah,
that over the years had been in the parking clerk's budget, for instance, the paper tickets and things like that,
Right.
probably should have
Right.
never been there anyway. So with a new system and the new handheld devices that they have their own costs on it, that went into the police department budget where it's better located.
and so really the parking clerk itself is more administrative now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay. And then election and registration, as opposed to election expense, that one's going down a little over 8%, What is election and registration in this context?
Well, you know what? There's a few budgets at the town clerk's office, right? There's the actual town clerk's budget.
Right.
There is election and registration. There is election expense, that is the actual cost of running the election. Okay. Election and registration is the actual cost of registering people, the board of maybe handling the census,
Yep.
and things like that. And actually, what our town accountant decided is that some of that election and registration money probably should be in the town clerk's budget. So it is a little bit confusing.
Yeah.
Like what bucket does that come out of? The entire town is one bucket, right? So everything comes out of that. So probably I'm thinking that as we try to streamline some of these budgets, next year maybe there should just be a town clerk's budget with a line in it that says election expense, a line in it that says this. Might be better for everyone just to think about that as one budget. So we'll have to see and figure out how that goes.
Well, and actually that brings up an interesting point, because at what juncture does the town government look at budgets in general and reassess the buckets?
Yeah.
You know, what because things do
right.
change over the decades.
They do. I think it's a constant. It's a
Yeah.
constant exercise. You'll see in a lot of budgets. Let's see, a cost for communications, internet access. I think that we should go to a point where we probably, centralize that and then charge back each department for what they use. Very good thing. Some people on the finance committee over the years have said, we're going to have a whole budget here for health insurance, that should be charged back to each department. So that's something that I think about. Should all the health insurance costs on the DPW go to the DPW budget? Where it becomes a little bit problematic to me on that is that you have some smaller departments that all of a sudden are going to look very bloated, and then maybe you add one person one person gets health insurance now
Right.
in a smaller department for whatever reason they didn't have it before. All of a sudden that department looks like it's bloated because of that. So there are some things that we need to consider. Some of my time, some of our town accountant's time, some other people are working for enterprise accounts, so we charge some of that back there, for the enterprise accounts, like water and sewer or what have you. So I think that those are the things that we kind of talk about. How do we make each department, what's the actual cost of having Department X? And, I know that when I can look
Right.
at all that, but should it be done a little bit differently? So it's a constant, and it's a good discussion that we have. Finance committee has a discussion on that all the time too. Some members want to say, well, the cost of retirements you want to charge back to each department. That's an interesting dynamic as well. So.
Something to look forward to. Ending on election expense, though, brings us up to, and we're going to step away from town meeting for a minute, the upcoming town election.
Yes.
Which is scheduled for Tuesday, April 28th.
Tuesday, April 28th, yes. We're probably getting close to pull your papers if you haven't already.
Papers became available on January 2nd. So they've been available for a while. Just to remind people out there, the presidential primary election is Tuesday, March 3rd. It's coming up in only 2 weeks.
That is coming up, yeah.
2 weeks from our tape date. But papers have been available for nominations since January 2nd. And the dates that we have coming up, the deadline for pulling the papers, that ends Friday, March 6th at 5 p.m. Then the deadline for submitting the papers is Tuesday, March 10th at 5 p.m. Deadline for challenges and withdrawals is Thursday, March 19th at 5 p.m., despite the fact that Town Hall is open till 7:30.
Right.
5 p.m. is the deadline.
And on Friday, Town Hall is normally open to 12:30.
Right,
So that'll have to be a little bit later.
right.
provide
Town
anybody
clerk's
come in.
office
Right.
on the 6th will be open until 5. But what's interesting, normally by this time of the year, I have multiple pages for candidates. And we have 3/4 of a page.
Right. And I think maybe one contested race.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Right now, and more to the point, we don't have any debates this year so far.
Well, you don't.
I have no debates this year so far. We have 2 candidates for the 2 seats on town council, both looking to return for another term, Maureen Butt and Ed Dombrowski. The one that is most concerning, and this happened last year, almost right up to the deadline, we have 1 candidate for 2 seats on the school committee, also looking for another term, Chris Callanan. But other than that, we have pretty much 1 candidate for available seats.
Right. I think other than the Board of Assessors, last time I looked, you have incumbent is Yano Tyne, and he has pulled papers. And
Right.
prior to his pulling papers, there David Ladon,
That was it.
that pulled papers. He was an assessor years ago, moved out
Yep.
of town, now has moved back in. So that's really the only race that I know of right now, unless someone pulled papers by the time between yesterday when you picked up this sheet and today. But I haven't heard. So
No, as of my discussion today, there have
Yeah.
been no additions to the list. And so if anyone is interested in vying for any of these seats, the opportunity is still there to get your papers, and it's how many signatures?
I think it's, is it 50? I don't even know how many.
I'm not sure
50 or
either.
25? I think it's 50.
Yeah.
I forget.
The one I'm not surprised not to see on here yet
Yeah.
is William Harbison Carroll. He always waits until the very
The
last
town moderator,
minute.
yes.
Yep. Although this year, this will be the last time he'll have to take them out if he wins for 3 years.
For 3 years, yes. That was a change in the charter. And
Yep.
it was a good change.
Yeah,
We only have to worry about it once every
every 3 years.
every 3 years now.
But so again, if anyone is interested in running, please go down to town clerk's office and take out papers. We need some new blood in some of these organizations, which
It
would be a
is-
good thing.
Running for public office, it does take up, let's not lie, it does take up some of your time.
Yep,
You do give up some of your privacy,
yep,
but it's also very rewarding. I mean, you really are able to affect change and affect meaningful change and work to try to make, Wakefield and and the state, what have you, a better place. So I'm very grateful that people do run, because I think it is, I get the time, I understand
Right.
the time that it takes away from your work, your family, your leisure time, what have you, your children. But it is, we can't run this community if we don't have people that serve on these boards.
right.
We've been very lucky for years and years. So I agree with you. I encourage people to take it out and try. And I do agree. I think the school committee to me is the most perplexing, because a lot of people have a lot of things to say about how the school department is run, are very willing to give their 2 cents on a myriad of issues, yet I don't see anybody actually pulling papers to run on
And this is the second year we've had
Second
this,
year we've had this, yeah.
situation. Last year, we went almost up to the deadline before there was a second candidate for the second seat.
Right. And I get it. And I understand it, especially for people that have children in the school system.
Mm-hmm.
And they, do they want to run because they think there could be some sort of a backlash or something to their kids. I have to say that in all the years that I've been involved in this, I haven't seen that occur.
Right.
I think that by and large, our community is very, very professional about those things. I think that the teachers and the administrators at the school department do not allow that sort of thing to happen and don't allow it in their own lives. So I think I get it that people are concerned about that, but I don't think that its history has been that it's not warranted, as far as I know.
Right.
So
budget-wise, going back to the budget, we have some other things that we'll be talking about down the road in the next two programs. The third program, of course, we're going to focus on the public safety building.
Yep.
Because that comes up again this year.
Yes.
And very important. But we also do have the Greenwood School roof.
Yep.
Final vote on that.
Yeah, the funding vote. Yeah.
Yep. And
that's a great story in itself too, because that is a million, could be a well over $1 million project.
Right.
And half of it is going to be paid for. Basically, half of it's going to be paid for by in the state repair program.
Right.
So not only is the roof going to get done, and that roof has been on the capital plan for years and years and years, but also we're going to get, as part of that project that the state is going to require, and it's not a bad thing that they're requiring it, a number of accessibility improvements that should be in that school anyway now.
Right.
So we're able to, as part of this, to bring that up to code, and that is also included in the reimbursement. So it's it's one of those things that is necessary, needed, and is going to make a difference.
I know for a while they were looking at the possibility of putting solar panels on the roof, but structurally, being a 123-year-old building,
structurally,
just couldn't happen.
It didn't seem like it could happen. It also seemed like to investigate it, to prove that it, to allow it to happen in an investigatory stance would be a lot of money, just even to get to that point. And I think even then the feeling was it may not really make it anyway. And who knows if that was the best spot from a sun standpoint as well.
Right.
I didn't know. I don't know if it was or wasn't. But rest assured, we will be putting solar in another area on another town building in town. That's maybe the subject for another day, but it is going to happen.
That should be
So
the
it is gonna
subject for a whole show.
For a whole show.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the nice thing about having it at one of the schools was the educational component with the kids.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think we can still figure out a way to make that happen. A building is a building, right? We can say, are we getting, how much of the energy are we getting that runs this building? What are we doing with it? Where is it going?
Sure.
Does that get sold back, which is kind of a strange thing to think about. I think as a young person, we're selling back electricity. So it's used elsewhere, and there's actually maybe a profit to run that building and actually bring some money back in. So it's an exciting venture and an interesting venture, and it is going to happen somewhere else. So everyone should rest assured, just because it's not happening in Greenwood doesn't mean it went away.
Right. Excellent.
Thank you.
We'll pick this up again in a month.
We will.
Thank you for joining us. See you next month.